Would you like to know what a horizontal exit is? Today, we're going to find out. We're going to see what a horizontal exit is. We're going to see at least 3 examples of different scenarios where a horizontal exit could help. And last, we're going to see what the IBC requirements are for a horizontal exit. So if you want to find out, don't go anywhere, stay tuned, you're about to find out. By the way, what did you think of that intro? It's the first time I use it. It's always a little scary when you're trying out new things, right? But let me know in the comments below what you thought of the new intro. By the way, a quick intro for those who don't know me. My name is Josue Diaz. I am a licensed architect in the state of California, and this is the ArchiCorner channel. Welcome. So, horizontal exits. The truth about horizontal exits is that they are very rarely used. And that's why it's so confusing for some people, because a lot of people have not seen them, much less design them. And I've seen some videos where people are trying to explain this, but I mean, in my not so humble, very egotistic point of view, I think this video is going to be way better. But you tell me below, if there's a better video, put the link there and see if they have better information than what you're going to find out today. So let's get started. The term itself, horizontal exits, is very confusing. And that's because people are still a little bit confused as to what an exit is. A lot of people still think that the door that leads outside or to the exterior is your exit. There's a whole video that explained this. If you haven't seen it, there'll be a link up here somewhere. It will also be in the description below. So let's start by clarifying what an exit is. In this example, you see a multi-level office building, and like many other buildings, every floor has a minimum of 2 stairwells. That way, each floor has 2 ways to get out of the building. Per the building code, your exit starts when you enter the exit stairwell, and it ends when you get to the exit that leads directly out. So that door that leads directly out is kind of part of the exit, but it's actually the very tail end of it. It's the end of your exit and the beginning of your exit discharge. If you look at this exit in a section view, just like we're showing in this example, you can see that it goes from the top to the bottom, up, down. What orientation is that? That's your vertical orientation, right? So if this entire area is your exit, then guess what? You could call this your vertical exit, right? Let's just call it that for now. And following that logic, what if we were to divide this floor in 2 so that we build a special wall and separate the floor in 2 such that there's space A and space B. And if we're egressing from space A, we have one vertical exit where we exit down, and then we have a horizontal exit where we exit into the adjacent space. And then space B is the exit. But wait a minute. You might be thinking to yourself, this goes against all that I've learned so far in school and at work. Normally, what we are told to do is to get people out of the building. So you have a stairwell on one side, a stairwell on the other side, and you exit all the way out. Well, my friends, welcome to the world of horizontal exits. There's a reason why they're so rare. It's because you don't always want to do that. As a matter of fact, horizontal exits usually are placed to satisfy specific scenarios and special circumstances. But if you do build a separation wall, just like we show on this diagram here, you could do just that. But just to clarify, clarification number 1, yes, normally you have been taught correctly. Normally you want to have 2 exits completely out into the outside of the building. So you would normally want to go all the way out of the building. However, clarification number 2, you can't assume that people will always be able to, that they can exit all the way out, and 2, that people should get out. So this takes us to sample scenarios of when you can use one. We mentioned that you shouldn't always assume that people can or are able to get out of the building. Can you think of a few scenarios where people may not be able to get out of the building? What about hospitals, nursing homes, psychiatric hospitals, or facilities? By the way, these could all be grouped into an I2 occupancy group. And I really apologize. I don't mean this to come out, wrong. So I'm sorry if I'm using the wrong terminology here. But sometimes people are not physically, mentally, or emotionally capable of exiting the building. In other words, they're not able to get out of the building. So it makes sense that special scenarios would be allowed special circumstances to fulfill the requirements, right? So again, let's look at a scenario here. Same thing, we're thinking of a hospital in this case. And as you can see here, there might be people that can't walk, that may not be able to get down the stairs. So what do? Well, the people that are able to use the stairs, they can use one of the stairs to get out. But the other people who can't are assisted into a space where they can be safe and secure. Once they are transferred into this area, if it's possible, they can evacuate in an orderly manner or wait till the fire emergency has ended. By the way, this evacuation strategy is called defend in place, and sometimes it's the only resort that some people might have. And just to clarify, as you can see in this diagram, there is a stairway available out of this area as well though. So people could still access that area or get out of that area. So that's one example, hospitals and similar facilities. Let's now look at a second example. We mentioned earlier that there may be some areas where people shouldn't get out. Can you think of any situations where that might happen? Hey man, we should totally bust out of this place. If we just pull that fire alarm, all the doors will open and we'll be free. Let's bust out of here. I'm sorry, it's a weird voice, I know. But here you have some scenarios like correctional centers, detention centers, jails, or reformatories. By the way, these all fit within an occupancy group I3. And people who are in these specific locations are locked away for a reason. You normally don't want these people to get out. Nevertheless, if there was a fire emergency, you'd also want them to be safe and secure. So in this instance, it also makes sense. Having a horizontal exit could be a location that they could exit into if the area they are in is in danger. And by the way, an I3 occupancy group is the only group that has an exception where both of the exits can be horizontal exits. So we could add another special wall here to create a second horizontal exit. And it makes sense, right? You want to make sure that these type of locations have security so that people don't just leave the facility with ease. Nevertheless, they're still safe and secure if the emergency was to come about. And since we're already talking about exceptions, the past example where we showed an I2 occupancy group, there is also an exception where if you need multiple exits, 2/3 of your exits could be horizontal exits. And again, this makes sense because many people in a hospital, especially in certain areas of the hospital, may have a lot of people who cannot exit the building. They're just not able to. So now let's look at a third example, a third scenario where you could use a horizontal exit. Now this could be like the cheat scenario. And that just means that sometimes there may need to be some creative ways where you can accomplish certain goals. You may need to find out a way to have more occupants than you're allowed to meet travel distances, or to meet the number of exits that may not be possible otherwise. Let's look at this third example. Let's say for a minute that a tenant wants to take the entire floor here, and they're going to use this for office. However, the design requires 700 occupants. Now that's a problem. Why? Well, you might already know this. IBC table 1006.3.2 tells us that as soon as you reach 501 occupants, you need 3 exits out of a building. And as you can see here, there's only 2 exits. You have a stair on one side and a stair on the other. So that's a problem, right? So horizontal exit to the rescue. If you build a special wall here to divide the floor in 2, Now you have space A and space B. Technically, you still have 700 occupants, but now you can use each space for the egress of the other. Let's look at the diagram here. Even though there's still the same tenant, now space A has 350 occupants, and space B also has 350 occupants. And how many exits do you need if you only have 350 occupants? Well, in an office scenario like this, you only need 2. Using space A as an example, space A has 350 occupants, so 2 exits. One exit goes into the stairwell, and the other exit goes into the adjoining space. In other words, into your horizontal exit. And likewise for space B. In a case of an emergency, space B could exit into the stairwell, first exit, and your second exit could be into the adjacent space, which in this case is space A. And there you go, problem is solved. This is one way where a horizontal exit could potentially solve a problem like this. And so there you go. That's an example on how a horizontal exit could potentially solve a problem similar to this one. So up to this point, you know quite a bit. Now you know what a horizontal exit is, and you've seen at least 3 different scenarios on when a horizontal exit could provide a good solution. And if you're now thinking to yourself, all right, now I know what a horizontal exit is and I want to design one. I want to see if I can implement a horizontal exit into one of my designs. Well, there are things that you have to have in mind that the building code requires if you want to design a horizontal exit. But before I move on to this third point, I'd like to ask you guys all a special question. There has been a lot of comments received where Patreon keeps coming up. It's one of those things where people keep asking, do you have a Patreon account? Do you have a Patreon account? And the answer is no, I don't have one. I understand similar concepts of it, but if a Patreon account was to be started, I'd like to ask you a simple question. What would you expect from it? Because as I understand, a Patreon account is where people give you money, but money is never free. There's an expectation of what you want in return for giving your money, right? You earned that hard-earned money. So you want to have something. And that's where I'm a little inquisitive. I'm wondering, what do you want in return? Is it something that can be provided? And if so, maybe it's something that can be provided in the future. If you don't mind, leave me a comment below as to what you would like to see in a Patreon account, or if you even think one would be of interest to you. So now we're going to jump into the boring stuff. I mean, oh man. You want to know everything about horizontal exits? Keep watching. Some of this stuff is a little boring and dry, but I'll try to make it as exciting as possible. I don't know if that's even doable, but let's try. First, let's talk about the limitations. The building code states that if you only need one exit out of a space or from the building, it cannot be a horizontal exit. So therefore, you can only use a horizontal exit when 2 or more exits are required, which takes us to our second point on limitations. If you need 2 or more exits, no more than half of your exits can be horizontal exits. We've already mentioned it before, but there are 2 exceptions. Do you remember? One is if you have an I2 occupancy group, in which case, if you do, you can bump that up slightly so that if you need multiple exits, 2/3 of your exits can be horizontal exits. And there's the exception for an I3 occupancy group. Do you remember what that is? Well, in this specific scenario, 100%, or in other words, all of your exits can be horizontal exits. And those are your limitations as to when you can use and how many exit doors you can use. Moving on to the requirements of this special wall we keep talking about. This wall has to separate one space from the other, right? Well, IBC 1026.2 tells us what's so special about this wall. This wall has to have a 2-hour fire rating. And there was another video that was created that talks about fire rated walls, and it explains that there's different types of walls that provide a fire rating. In this specific instance, if you want to build a horizontal exit, that special wall has to be built as a firewall or a fire barrier. or a horizontal assembly, or a combination of a fire barrier and a horizontal assembly. So that is what you need to know if you are going to build this separation between the floor. And this is the requirement if you want to build a wall that separates these two areas in the floor. Now you need openings, right? You need a door that's an opening that leads from one space to the other and vice versa, from one space to the other. If you have openings, and you will have them, otherwise there's no point to a horizontal exit, they also need to meet certain requirements. And that is, they must meet the opening protection requirements of IBC section 716. And this applies both to fire doors and fire protection rated glazing. Now, fire doors have an additional requirement than just what's in that section, and that is that they have to be self-closing and activated by a smoke detector. There's also special requirements if you have ducts or air transfers going through that fire-rated wall. Now, there's also requirements as to where the wall should start and end, speaking vertically. Looking at this diagram, if the floors are built as 2-hour rated floor assemblies, then your wall just needs to go from one floor below to the floor above. And that's it. But if the floors are not 2-hour rated floor assemblies, then the wall has to separate the entire building. So you would start from all the way at the top and divide it all the way down below. So now we know the limitations of when a horizontal exit is allowed. We know the type of wall it has to be, how far up and how far down it has to go. So now let's talk about the space itself. The horizontal exit must have sufficient space. And it just makes sense because you are taking all the people on half of the floor or whatever section of the floor, and you're moving them into the other section of the floor. So you have to make sure that you have enough space to fit those people. In this instance, space A and space B are being used as each other's horizontal exit. For example, if space A is going to exit into the horizontal exit, then you have to assume that worst case scenario, space B being the horizontal exit, it's going to have the occupants from space A plus the occupants of space B. So there has to be a space in space B that acts as a refuge area, not to be confused with an area of refuge, which is very similar terms, and maybe there's some similarities, but an area of refuge is completely different. And that is why it's very common that when a horizontal exit is used, the tenant takes both sides. Because nobody wants some weird tenant or somebody you don't even know coming into your space in a case of an emergency, right? All they have to do is pull a fire alarm and all of a sudden the door into your space opens. There's no security in that. That's why it's often the same tenant on both sides of that horizontal wall. And just for the record, if it was a separate tenant, because I guess it could happen, then you would need to have a common area where you can exit into, right? So if people from space A are going to space B, maybe they're exiting into a common area, like a corridor or a lobby or something like that. But then the question is, how much space do you have to provide for this area? And to answer this question, we actually have to have a look at two options. And from those options, we have to select whichever gives you less occupants, either the actual occupant load or the occupant load based on the door width. The first option or scenario is when you take a look at the actual occupant load of the space. For example, again, we're talking about space A exiting into space B, but you have to do this vice versa, right? But if space A has 200 occupants, then that's your occupant load. And there's another video that talks about how to calculate occupant loads. And this is done per IBC section 1004. If you want to see a video, it's somewhere here. It will also be in the description below. And option 2 or scenario 2 is taking into account the door width that goes from space A into space B. For example, if space A exited into space B using a double door, that just for the sake of an example here, let's assume that the double door has a clear width of 64 inches. Then we take 64 inches, we divide it by 0.2, and we come up with 320 occupants. And this is done per IBC section 1005.3.2. So in this example, scenario 1 wins because it's the least amount of occupants. And so we can assume that space A is going to have 200 occupants exiting into space B. And if space B has 200 occupants itself, then you have 200 occupants from space A plus 200 occupants from space B for a total of 400 occupants. Now all you have to do is take the number of occupants, which in this case is 400, and times it by 3 square feet, which gives you a total of 1,200 square feet. That is the size of the refuge area that you must provide within your horizontal exit. And in case you're wondering, we have to use 3 square feet per occupant as required by the building code as noted here. There are a few exceptions where you may have to use something different. And it just makes sense because areas like hospitals may need to not just take a person, but the bed and the equipment and things like that that may be associated with that person's life or the things that are keeping them alive. So 3 square feet is normally required with the exception of occupancy groups I1, I2, and I3. Man, did you get through all of that? I mean, this stuff is kind of boring sometimes, but hopefully it's something that you liked and that gave you more knowledge. And now you know what a horizontal exit is. You've seen at least 3 different scenarios on where a horizontal exit can help. And you know the basic requirements from the IBC, both limitations and requirements for the door. If you ever did want to look more into it, you have a very solid start. As always, thank you for watching this video. Hopefully the information found in this video is something that you liked. If you would like to support this channel, there's a few things that you could do to help it grow. 1, don't forget to hit that like button. 2, don't forget to subscribe if you haven't yet already. And 3, share this video with others. There may be friends, colleagues, or other people that you may know of that would find the information in this channel useful. Thank you again for watching this, for your support so far. But for now, this is Archie Corner signing out.